Mohammed Hammour comes, I will introduce him as well. So first of all, welcome again, everyone. My name is Sami Al-Daghistani. I'm an associate professor in Islamic studies at Lund University in Sweden, and it's my pleasure to chair this keynote panel. So welcome to our first keynote address for today. I'm honored to have next to me two distinguished scholars and economists who will share their insights on an economy for the benefit of humanity. And before I give the floor to the speakers, I will briefly like to introduce them. First with us is Professor Feridun Yılmaz, who graduated from Marmara University in Business Administration, and he's currently a faculty member in the Department of Economics at Bursa Uludağ University. His areas of expertise include the history of economic thought, political economy, philosophy of economics, and institutional economics. He has published many articles and books on the subjects, and one of most recently published books is İktisat Felsefeyi Düşünmek. I hope my Turkish is good enough, which would probably translate into thinking about economics with philosophy. So without further ado, Professor Yılmaz, the floor is yours. I was instructed to give around 20 minutes to each of the speakers, and after that we will engage in an open debate and Q&A session. Professor, tafaddal, is yours. Please a round of applause for Professor Yılmaz.
Thank you very much. I will speak in Turkish, as I said. First of all, welcome all. Hoş geldiniz hepiniz.
Diyorum. Welcome everyone. I think we will have a more philosophical presentation. For that reason, I would like to make my presentation in Turkish. And if you let me, okay, I have 20 minutes. First of all, our topic is economics in favor of humanity. So we are talking about economics discipline, and of course we will talk about the course of events in economics, and also, okay, I have to take the mic, okay. So we talk about in which theoretical context the economics developed. I will talk about that a bit, and then I will also talk about how the current situation of economics discipline, how the mainstream, and there are people who object to this mainstream economics, and also we know that they also talk about in a perspective of a world view, and of course, so for the mainstream and for the heterodox ones are not actually proposing a solution. I also will talk about that and underline that. As you all know, economics, like the other social sciences disciplines, is a product of capitalism, and after industrial revolution, because the high welfare developed, and also a problem of distribution evolved and emerged. So high welfare production processes and also the social structure has a change in its roots, and with crowded cities, of course, the cities started to grow, and we see after industrial revolution, and with these crowded cities, a new class we call as workers emerged after the Industrial Revolution. So we are talking about a story of 250 years. So it's a very actually recent phenomena, we can say, and we have born into this phenomena. And so when this word, which is shaped 250 years ago, now we are talking about the problems of this world we have born into, are now trying to find a solution with the thought which are proposed by this word. And so we know that it will not solve it. But we said that, yes, Industrial Revolution created a high welfare, of course, and this high welfare had a production processes, and the intellectuals who were writing about this production talked also about the distribution of this high welfare and discussed about that, because formerly, before the Industrial Revolution, the societies had an economy which was only for living, There wasn't an important problem about the distribution of the wealth, Of course, there was again the distribution of income problems, but after the Industrial Revolution, of course, with the production processes, this distribution problem emerged, and they had to think about that and how it should be divided equally to the people. And then the economics developed and economics people mostly like to find the definitions rules in the antique Greece, but I don't think so, because economics is a very modern discipline, like sociology, like politics, like all social sciences, I would like to say. So they don't have a long history, actually. So the discipline emerged in the junction of the era after Industrial Revolution. So who produced, you have to ask about the question, who produced this high welfare? And so who produces it? Of course, if we can answer that right, then you also talk about how you can distribute it in a legitimate way, with a socially accepted way, and you have to find the solution about that and discuss this. And so for that reason, the first century of economics is called as political economy. It starts with Adam Smith in 1777, and until 1870s it was called as political economy. And if you pay attention, during political economy era, it was also, actually we can say, economics theory. The discussion of economics theory focused on the distribution of this welfare of wealth, because for the first time in the humanities history they managed to produce more than they need, and the intellectuals need to find an answer to the distribution question, of course, and it was widely discussed. If economics is a social science, and 100 years ago, before economics, natural sciences emerged, as you know. So in a simultaneous way with these technological developments, with some small steps, of course, and the natural sciences also emerged within philosophy, but then these natural sciences, which simultaneously and not a result of their efforts, of course, they have a science history debate here, and then the technology. Okay, I feel the echo of my voice, but sorry about that. Okay, so in the natural sciences, they actually have a high prestige in the societal hierarchy, actually, not only the carrier of the solutions to their problems, but also the managing the life with science, they said. And with the 18th century, with the Enlightenment period, they also start to discuss about how to manage society. And then the social sciences accepted this as a duty of themselves. So then the other disciplines emerged within social sciences. So in this junction, of course, the economics people, like the other social sciences and more than them, started to make this discipline as a science. So we also they think that we emerged in the center of philosophy, and you have to be a science discipline. So in order to make it a science, we are talking about mainstream economics here, so you have to make it in the most positivist way, so that you can raise its voice, use as a science. So contemporary economics who won Nobel, for example, none of them have a look to the neighbor disciplines, for example, to sociology, to psychology, to political sciences. Because they don't have it, actually, they don't have a relation to the philosophy too. Yes, they sometimes think about ethics a bit, but to make it a hard science, they think that it damages the effort for making it a hard science. So I would like to give an anecdote. I don't know the number, but maybe there are 15 economics men who won Nobel, and in the Netherlands, economics man published a book of interviews with these Nobel-winning economics men. You know, he talked about asymmetric inflation, American economics man. And he asked a question to these men, and I knew that thanks to your sociological attention, you actually created a rich contribution to economics. What is the foundation of this knowledge? And Akerlof was surprised about that, and he says that I don't have any sociology attention. I just got a lesson from Robert Merton's book in Harvard, in Introduction to Sociology 101, and then I call it as a waste of time, and many economics see it as a waste of time. And all mainstream economics people actually draw a very strict boundary for the discipline. So in terms of sociological context, they still want to add extra prestigious perception to them. And then, of course, Nobel Awards actually was introduced, as you know, with a huge donation. The U.S. American Economic Association donated a huge amount of money to the Sweden Academy, and then they started to give Nobel Awards. And because they are giving Nobel Awards to the natural sciences, and though economics see itself as a unique science, and the other social sciences like sociology, political sciences, they asked about why we don't get a Nobel. And they said that, okay, they got a Nobel in literature. You are making literature, but we are making science, they say. So when you set out for the road to be a science in the political economy era of the first century of economics, Adam Smith, Ricardo, they matured it, and Adam Smith has the first perception, and then Ricardo started a discussion about value and labor. And this labor value theory, of course, you are building a science here, and science has to give you something measurable and objective and universal validity. It has to give you a theory like that. And of course, and so you start for a small formation, and then you expand it, as you know, so that you can find some metrics to measure it. So why we don't have something like that in economics? They ask this question. So we see price to, then we have to talk about value and labor theory. So for the first 50 or 60 years of economics after Adam Smith actually dominated the discussion in economics. And then this labor value theory, it has a scientific attention to it. It drew a scientific attention, but it also has some weaknesses, and Marx is also aware of these weaknesses in this theory, but they couldn't solve it, of course. But this is the first thing. They start to establish a scientific background. So there is a high welfare here. It is the first time in the history of humanity. So you have to explain it in a scientific foundation, and then you have to find a legitimate way of distributing it. So labor got the wage, and the capital got the profit. And so you also call it as a gain. But there are also some labor and value theory, because it couldn't describe all of these problems with the relations of the society, there are new discussions emerged in this point, because we cannot show a consistent explanation about these discussions in economics in those times, and more analytic mindsets emerged. The discussion about benefit and value theory. We call it as fayda değer in Turkish. And so we can explain price. It is, in a mathematical sense, it's very consistent, but in terms of it is established in a humanistic context. So they established this theory, and then it has a mathematically consistent explanation, so it makes you to jump to a higher class, but it also creates a very high social tension, and as a discourse it puts it to the rubbish bin, to the history, and then they start to discuss an economic order which doesn't have a problem about distribution in the capitalist system. They claim that in capitalist system there isn't an problem of distribution of the wealth. So this mainstream economy has a highly consistent explanation in mathematical way, but in the current situation of the system, there isn't a problem. In its nature, it doesn't have a problem, they say. So you can say how it is possible. Capitalism creates inequalities and unfair practices, how they can explain it as a system which functions without any problem. And neoclassical economics talking about it like that. And we call it also mainstream economy. But they say that simply, actually, yes, there is a economics play here. We have agencies playing their role, and everyone gets their benefits according to their own role they play. So in the first century of political economy, the distribution discussion was in the focus of theoretical context. I think there are a lot of people here in economics, I think now, here in this hall, and in microeconomics books, in the last chapters of these books are always discussed about that. It's just a technical discussion. And so everyone gets their gain in terms of their contributions. So it is actually coming out of the nature of the system. So it is a very liberal narrative we are talking about. So when we carry it to the 20th century, it also gives you another possibility, of course, after the marginalist revolution. Yes, it is consistent in terms of math context, but it also overcomes all the barriers about this mathematical language. It explains it with the mathematical language. So, and in 1940s and 1950s, after 1950s, we see that economics is more and more gets closer to the maths, and it creates actually an envy, because they know that the science language comes out of maths, and so when you make it more and more related with maths, they think that it isn't possible to discuss it as a science. So without further ado, then we even discuss about Keynes, or the economics narrative, which is liberal in its nature. We see they continue. Keynes is the lord of liberalism. You all know. With Keynes, the interruption of the state to the liberal economy is more and more legitimized, and they open the door for the state economic. So it is actually again very widespread in mainstream economy. But with the dominancy of liberal narrative, the dosage of the state's interruption to the economy actually necessitates itself here. So because my time is 20 minutes, I have to keep it short. So I am actually they tried to call them as original economics person. And then after this new economics emerged, institutional economics was discussed, and they started to discuss it with their rivals. And these discussions comes from Veblen. And I was also in this discussion. We are in Turkey, we are born into this time, and I am one of the Muslims in these times, and for the functioning of this order, I see a narrative which isn't responding to my heart, to my feeling, and these words do not respond to my needs. And there are narratives these words tells me, and there's a story also in the economics, and they say that this system functions with very cheap maths formula. It functions well, they say, but we see that this discipline, how this discipline emerged, in which conditions, in which philosophical existence it emerged. I had to understand it, and I also have to stay in the discipline. So what is the road to solve it? But it was not so popular in my time. But heterodoxy economic schools I encountered then, I encountered Veblen tradition. And institutional economics claim was that Cartesianism is the foundation of this first tradition of economics, and it is a product of pragmatism of U.S. philosophy. And for the first half of 20th century, it was perceived as as a rough capitalism. And Charles Peirce and William James and John Dewey also told that they are actually having a fight with this Cartesian fight. They were also Cartesian discussion. They were also influenced by Hegel. And the distinction between theory and practice should be revealed, they say. And after Keynesian discussions, people started to discuss it more. So the human is a social human is the one which has the social, economic, and philosophical existence, they say. But these heterodox economic schools were actually setting the boundaries for mainstream economics, and they provide you the opportunity to see it in the philosophical context. But these heterodox economic schools are also talking from the window of a specific word. So language is our way to open ourselves to the world. So in social science, the language of the social sciences, the mainstream ones and heterodox ones, are actually giving us the opening of a different world, which has a different existence. When compared with us, we have a different existence from them. So, which word they are voicing their thoughts actually, and what is their existence, and how my existence reflects into these words? What is the road to understand? And so I had to understand the objections to these schools. Then I had an insight about that. It was not an autobiography now, but of course I even knew that even these people who object to this word view are also talking within this word view. So I would like to say that even the mainstream, because they have a pure Cartesian thought, which is very concrete and in a maths context, and it is a positivism. It's like an axionist maths, and it emerged like that in our country and in the world, and they have a shining theory about that. But some of them who are objecting that they sometimes get their basis from ethics or culture or historical or philosophical background, but the place they voice their thoughts is the humanism. Actually, it is not about we see in Turkish as a humanism, but a philosophical existence. is actually how the Western existence, whatever discipline they are under, they all voice humanism. Actually, humanism is in the root of this, all of these worldview, and it is something, of course, emerged after Renaissance. As you know, it's not a style that I refer to as something emerged after Renaissance. It's about just a global context part in whatever discipline you talk. It is a shape of opening shape of this thing to the world. So if we try to understand which voices we see in this world, we hear their voices, but we still have to keep in mind that they are still talking in this world. So what is our effort means in this discussion? So in Islam economics, we object to the homo economics and we reject interest, yes. But our counterpart, talking from their own word, they say that you do not give me an original thought. I also have moral economy. Why do I need yours? Because you also you will also have an extra recommendation which will negatively influence my economics. I also have some search or pursuits for moral concerns, but it's not original to me, they say. So, okay, for the efforts, is it in vain? No, of course, I do not talk about that, because for a discipline of Islam economics, for example, when you stay in a discipline, your criticism will stay also in the word of this discipline. So if you think about, we also have to make ourselves think to the word they are speaking to more. So it is actually, I am talking a bit maybe with the terminology of the Western European philosophical context, but that's all. I think we also have to need to talk about the boundaries of, to go over the boundaries of this word. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Yılmaz, for your insight and your presentation. We have a few minutes before I introduce our second guest and second speaker. And allow me just to ask, it's a comment / question before we open up the floor as well. Now, you've discussed the foundations of economics as being rooted in philosophical structure or philosophical origins. And in light of this, and this probably pertains not only to Adam Smith, who I think was a moral philosopher by training, not necessarily an economist, and this would probably entail the fact that, you know, his book, The Moral Sentiments, has to be read then in tandem with his book, The Wealth of Nations, for instance, right? He was concerned deeply also about moral and ethical questions, not only about production. And then this goes back to the ancient Greece and Plato and Aristotle and so forth, the very notion of oikos as something that pertains to household, but also beyond household. Now, in light of this, and this is admittedly a very simple yet very broad question, how would you ideally define economics? Because I'm asking, and this is something I alluded in my own presentation on decolonization, I think we're always in a need to reclaim or to redefine concepts and terms that are explaining the world. And they're not necessarily of our own making, so to speak. It's something that has been either predefined and then redefined or readopted, right? So how would you ideally define economics in the context of the philosophical foundations of economic science that really goes beyond, as you mentioned, mathematics, jurisprudence, the technical aspect of it, right? And this obviously pertains to the fact that, in essence, the economic questions are ethical or moral in nature.
Thank you. Haliyle çok büyük belirttiği gibi.
Of course, this is a very, very broad question, and the answer has to be broad. Yes, it's a broad question, and it doesn't have a clear clear-cut answer. It is an answer that we can give to this question that reflects our perspective of the world. And of course, I was not criticizing the mathematics in the mainstream economics, because when we go back to the real core or foundation of the question, Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments and wealth of nations, when you compare them, it puts forward the sympathy. Maybe a more moral world is included there. The problem of Adam Smith, for example, first in German and then in English, there's always this discussion all around it. And ethics of economics, you probably know this writings from a conference, actually, not a book or anything like that, but moral sentiments, from moral sentiments, there's a wane coming to our world, of today's world, and also the wealth of nations has a wane that comes to our world, to our time. But I am usually questioning the basics, the foundation, and I think we should move forward to questioning the foundations. It is not easy to put into words, and when we need labels, humanism as a philosophical concept, and I think we need to use these terms if we want to talk about a clear definition or clear terms. And the humanism that is shaped under philosophy or under psychology, normally in core they don't have a difference. So each of them is actually looking into the behaviors of people, and when you look at it holistically, so it actually gives us an idea that we can understand humans better when we have a holistic view of all these areas. There's a general conception that we understand humanity better because it gives us a knowledge, something to know about humanity in general. But of course, when we look at our world and our time and the Muslims that live in this world and this time, within the boundaries of economics or within the boundaries of sociology, whenever you stay in these boundaries, you kind of try to hold some space in these discussions within the boundaries of these areas. So the description or definition of human existence, when you are doing this definition, when you are saying that this person or this human is completely related to ethics or is covered in ethics, for example, if you are talking on the basis of ethics, if you are talking about Muslim behavior or Muslim-like behavior, when you want to voice this, a non-Muslim person, if they are talking about the same basis of ethics, you will go separate ways in the first stop. There is no common ground for you there, because the style of existence for each of you kind of separates you there. So what about the economics there? Of course, I don't have a clear-cut definition, but the late poet Sezai Karakoç talks about the economical structure of the Islamic society in the beginning of the 70s. It will be a little bit of a poetic answer, so it won't be a definition per se, but in the Islamic society or Islamic economy, let's say. I'm not remembering it correctly probably, but even a stone on the road, just a pebble on the road, even that pebble has a right within the Islamic economics. So of course, the space that it holds within the capitalistic world and the additional problems that are brought by this, and the wealthy Muslims, the accumulated wealth, where they will use them. There is no practical answer to that. I know that, I am aware of that, but the answer we can only find by thinking about the foundation. So even the pebble on the side of the road has a right. So what does this right mean? What does this actually mean? This could be a little bit too poetic. Yeah, it is not within the boundaries of definition, but you may be heard about the interest rate definition. It is popular. Two people, two friends are trying to find some shade in a very hot day, and Imam Azam says that we will be sitting under the sun and we will rest here. And the friend asks why. Because he says we have to sit here. If we sit over there, we will use the shadow of the house of a person that I'm indebted to. So if I use his shadow, then I will be, using the interest rate. So that's why we have to sit over here. So what I'm trying to say is that whatever philosophical basis we have for creating our thoughts, the basis of humanism, we will continue to bring more ammunition to that area, whatever we do. That's the only one I know.
Thank you, Professor Yılmaz. I do have a follow-up question, but before I pose one, any comments, thoughts, or questions from the audience? Please, the floor is open. Any questions? Maybe when the audience is still thinking about a theoretical question. Speaking of challenges, and this is something that I'm trying to sort of say to my own students as well, what happens when you not necessarily remove, but replace names, theorists, scholars, for instance, Smith, Ricardo, or even Marx, or even the Chicago School, with scholars such as Al-Ghazali, or Isfahani, or even Khaldun? How does our own understanding of economics change when we challenge the prevalent, common Western perceptions and also canon in economic literature? And this obviously does not go only for economics, it's also every other field, including philosophy, sociology, ethics, and so on and so forth. So again, because I do believe that economic teachings in essence are much broader than only technical or jurisprudential in nature. Maybe if you can just provide a brief answer before we move forward.
Teşekkürler, thank you.
So if we were to replace these names with the names of ours, let's say, the political scientists of the 20th century, for example, I don't know if that's the correct definition, but when they are talking about the dynamism of politics and maybe some relations with the Nazis were kind of being voiced, and this name was towards the end of the 1990s, even the leftists in Europe, when they switched to liberalism, Carl Schmitt was the person they went to, because even if he had a completely different perspective from the continental Europe's leftists, he knew that he would be having the power of attack power, let's say, in a depth that the continental Europe leftists wouldn't reach. So, parliamentary democracy crisis, the nature of politics, etc., And Politic Romanticism, for example, is a book that I want to read in Turkish, but it's not translated yet. He has a separation of the, friend and enemy definitions. If we go back to the question, when we change or switch these names, Adam Smith, Marx, Ricardo, or coming towards the 20th century, the School of Chicago names, if we were to replace them with ours, what would change? There is a historical difference. We have to put this into words. Of course, the nature of economics in terms of the discipline that we are in. It also goes for sociology. So when you go on a journey to understand the nature of these disciplines, you talk about some theories, and there is an accumulation of knowledge that is usually in a textbook, and this is like an encyclopedical conveyance of this information. So I'm not talking about that. You use your language to open to the world in your own style, and you follow that. We have to follow that. I think we need to understand the difference of these acts, because you cannot just change a definition and broaden your world. For example, they say homo economics or something like that, and maybe you can put forward homo islamicus, but it's not the same thing. I mean, it doesn't give you anything if you give something with the same definition or different name and same definition. It doesn't matter. So it doesn't go out of humanism or liberalism just when you change the name. But when you think about the nature of things, we are living in a different time compared to Ghazali or Ibn Khaldun, for example. We are living in different times. There is a technological improvement, and there are a lot of advancements that led to increase in welfare, and even our biological bodies are kind of being transformed, and with a radical change, radical speed. And there are some explanations aimed at this radical change. And these explanations, when you look at the pessimistic ones, or the deeper thinkers, they feel like they are on the edge of a cliff. You see the discussions around transhumanism, for example. The nature of humans is in a transformation process. It is always being uttered, There are people who are taking this on a dystopic level, and some people think about how we can turn this reality into a more positive or livable world. But I think we have to bring another offer to the world from the foundation up. For example, the reason and the resolve of your problems, of the challenges, is in Islam, is in Falah. We have to say this. Nietzsche, for example, within the Western philosophy, it could be a chapter. Within the Western philosophy framework, Anglo-Saxon or analytical thinking tradition, and they wouldn't include Nietzsche, for example. And even if they were to include him, there is no analytical consistency. It's more literature, and it's a dark man, he's a dark man, etc. And for other people, they would be talking about, their relations with the Nazis, etc. What does Nietzsche talk about, and what does Heidegger talk about, and why are their words are so important, so effective in their world? You might say that you are talking outside of the boundaries of economics. That is what I'm trying to say. Yes, You might be outside of the economics, but you cannot never go outside of humanism. As I'm a little bit more interested in the philosophy of things, I am my words and my language is more reflective of that. But I think we need this. We have the wealthy, they have the capital, for example, and there is a economic and political competition going on, and it's growing. And as Muslims, we want to take our space in there. And this practical solution offers,
malzeme taşıyan bir düşünce üretimi
if we don't separate how it feeds the Western philosophy, then we cannot get out of it.
And we're slightly running over time. Dr. Mohammed Hammour, who is an academic economist as well as practitioner of participation finance. Dr. Hammour has served as member of the economics faculty of Columbia University and of the visiting faculty of Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the US, also as a director of research at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in France, and an economics professor at Ibn Khaldun University in Turkey. He currently oversees the course series on comparative ethics, politics, and economics at Usul Academy. Dr. Hammour holds a BA in philosophy and MS in industrial engineering from Stanford University and a PhD in economics from MIT. And indeed, yeah, thank you. So please give a warm welcome to Professor Hammour. The floor is yours. I give you around 20 minutes maximum. We're slightly over time, so we have some time for Q&A as well. Thank you so much.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. It's interesting that the one example of stark difference that's typically mentioned and has been mentioned today between the perspective of Islam on economics and the modern perspective is the issue of interest. So it's got to be that the question of finance has a degree of centrality in the domain of economics and gives rise to an important set of considerations relating to justice and ethics. And that's what I would like to focus on. I can see that I hope, let me just check the presentation, sorry. Yeah, I think it's fine. So my discussion relates to this, and I'd like to start with the modern perspective on what I will end up discussing as finance. Modernity emerged as a worldview, as an outcome of a traumatic history of religious experience and strife, and emerged in a way that this trauma led the modern mind to try to set aside the vertical dimension, the transcendent dimension, to become a private matter, so as not to raise more of the traumatic issues. And therefore developed as a worldview unencumbered by considerations of transcendent justice and responsibility. So if you look at my representation of relations of the modern individual with humanity, with nature, and with respect to transcendence, this third aspect is essentially pruned out of the worldview. And the relation then with respect to nature and humanity becomes one of power and exploitation unencumbered with transcendent principle. It doesn't mean that the vocabulary, the language of ethics is not used, but it is referring to a very different, non-transcendent, either immanent or individualistic dimension, or a more of a prudential arrangement in society. Now, this idea of power and exploitation applied both to nature and to humanity is often represented in our minds in the form of, or in the concept of the Industrial Revolution, the technological revolution, that of course gives power over others and over nature, whether it's military power or the power to produce and so on. But the reality is this outward technical revolution has an inward social dimension, which is a financial revolution. It is not as visible, but it is as crucial, and people have spoken about two revolutions of modernity, or a twin modern revolution of technology and finance. And I think it's the importance and power of this other dimension that I'd like to speak about. And in some sense, I think it's helpful to think of an equation representing each of these revolutions. The equation that's very popular in terms of technology is Einstein's equivalence of mass and energy. And that equivalence has something to do with the transformation of one into the other, and actually methods of transformation that we have as modern societies implemented. And it applies obviously to nature. So energy is a means of affecting change in the material world, in nature. Mass is a source that can be transformed into energy and affect change. And the core instrument that modernity has developed, from the steam engine to the electricity that powers artificial intelligence today, is effectively fossil fuel combustion. That's the core instrument, and we're trying to find alternatives to it, but that is really what modern technology is driven in terms of instrument. Now, the financial equivalent equation, and you might be puzzled by why I'm saying this, is the present value equation. The equivalent of mass is assets. It's a bundle of rights, social rights and responsibilities. And you want to transform these assets into something that in society can affect change. And that is actually money. Money is what buys you things. And so, therefore, the transformation of assets into money, which is what finance is about, is equivalent in the social domain to the transformation of mass into energy in the natural domain. And the instrument that the modern financial revolution has developed to transform assets into money is debt. In the same way as fossil fuel combustion has been the interest to transform mass into energy. So debt has been a central invention, if you will. Of course, the debt itself not, but the use of debt in extensive financial institutional development has been the central invention of modern money and finance, and has had a very essential and important aspect. Now, when we speak about sustainability in the natural world, we speak about, can fossil fuel combustion be sustainable? We speak also whether the levels of debt that we have reached as societies are sustainable. The Islamic perspective goes beyond the question of prudential sustainability and speaks more critically about justice and responsibility, and in particular applies them to the financial system. And that is the dimension. And we're speaking transcendent justice, not arrangements, and I'll come to this. And that is the dimension that the Islamic perspective can bring back to this unencumbered modern worldview. Now, if you think of the development since, you can call it the late 17th century until today, of the financial institutions, modern financial institutions, you can think of them as having a central purpose of continuously expanding debt capacity. I've put two columns just to take you through some of the key developments that we're all familiar with. Indirect columns that are framework for developing debt capacity, and direct developments directly affecting the issuance and origination of debt. Now, of course, as a prior to all of these development, there was 2 centuries of development transforming lending from the way the Islamic perspective would look at it into a commercial transaction, and that is the legalization of interest. Following that, and I'll come back to this more specifically, was the removal of the constraint of money, which was specie money, in terms of expanding debt. It's great that you're expanding techniques of debt and the legal framework for debt, but if the stock of money is just this amount of gold and silver that you have, this expansion is going to face major price adjustments before taking place. So the modern institution of modern debt-based money, meaning if you have more debt, you issue more money automatically, was introduced. And as money is the point of that transformation, this has become the central pole around which the entire edifice has been built. And then once you have this expansion of debt with interest, you've had major consequences that needed to be contained in terms of the liabilities, the obligations that people were incurring as they expanded debt. And you quickly, or in parallel, had the development of the concept of limited liability entities, and then the emergence of bankruptcy.
Ve buradaki tabii iflas bir dönemden daha fazla, aslında hatta yol kazaları yerine daha büyük başarısızlıklara yol açtı. Ve tabii ki bu fiskal boyutu bu durumun aynı zamanda bazen de özellikle faizin çıkarılamaması yani söz konusu oldu. Yani burada aslında herhangi bir sonuç, herhangi bir gerekçe yok, bir mantığı yok aslında. Bu kapasiteyi genişletmek aslında bir şekilde doğal, işte finansın doğal bir yolu diye görülüyor, yani borç yani düşürülmesi. Tabii doğrudan bazı gelişmeler var tabii ki, sonuçta işte faizin yasallaştırılması, modern borç paranın işte küçük limited şirketlerin ortaya çıkması, iflas kanunu, işte faizin düşürülebilmesi gibi şeyler var ama bunlara çok da girmeyeceğim. Yani faizin düşürülebilirliği, ama şuna bakalım. Modern para aslında tüm aslında bu bölgenin tüm finansın inşa edildiği odak şu: modern para. Para tek başına sadece bir kolaylaştırıcı değil, bir araç değil. Çünkü aslında doğal, işte bir barter alımından, işte bir doğal ortaya çıkan doğal bir enstrüman değil sadece. Modern para aynı zamanda yapay olarak tasarlanmış bir sistem ve siyasi olarak motivasyonlu olan bir yapı. Dolayısıyla tarihine baktığımızda aslında tamamen böyle ortaya çıkan doğal bir şey değil, aciliyetten ortaya çıkan bir şey değil. İkincisi, modern para aslında bir siyasi yapı ve aynı zamanda bu nedenle de politik ekonomide önemli bir rolü var. İşte gücün dağıtılması, bazı bozukluklara sebebiyet vermesi vesaire. Tabii ki bunu asla, bu aracı reddedemeyiz. Özellikle işlem yapılabilmesi, işte bunların akışkan olabilmesi bakımından da önemli. Nihayetinde modern para aynı zamanda kaçınılmaz bir şey. Çünkü para nihayetinde bir network etkisi de yaratıyor ve sonuçta ben kendi paramı yaratamam, icat edemem. Çünkü paranın toplumun kabul ettiği bir şey olması gerekiyor. Dolayısıyla bir İslami finanstan, İslami perspektiften, disiplinden bahsettiğimizde finansa bakış açısıyla ilgili biz maalesef modern parayla sınırlanmış durumdayız ve dolayısıyla modern paranın aslında çıktıları da etkileyeceği görülecek. Yani dolayısıyla bu çıktıları kabul etmekten başka seçeneğimiz yok. Bu yüzden bu İslami perspektife katkı konusunda düşünen kişiler finans bakımından şunu biliyorlar. Biz maalesef bir kafes içerisindeyiz ve bunun sınırları içerisindeyiz. Dolayısıyla bu çıktıları geliştirmek ve belli bozuklukları azaltmak istiyorsak bu kafes içerisinde maalesef ki bu genel özellikler, bu bozucu özelliklerin genel şeyleri maalesef bizim görmemiz gereken şeyler ve dolayısıyla sorumlu olan kişiler, yani bu durumdan sorumlu olan kişiler, İslam dünyasında finansın geleceğini düşünenler gerçekten bu sınırın farkındalar ve dolayısıyla alternatifler neler olabilir buna dair daha fazla düşünmek gerekiyor. Peki modern para nedir? Kısaca ondan da bahsedelim hızlıca. Modern para aslında oldukça hiyerarşik bir sistemdir ve dolayısıyla uluslararası bir sistemdir. Aynı zamanda baskın bir sistemdir, dominant bir sistemdir ve bunu anlamanın en iyi yolu da şudur aslında. Yani borç genişletmenin çözümüdür, öyle diye söyleniyor ve aynı zamanda nasıl verildiğine de bakmamız gerekiyor bu paranın. Yani dolayısıyla şunu biliyorsunuzdur belki. Bunları iki defa aynı şeyi söylemiş olmayayım ama bu noktada burada tarihe baktığımızda tarih
This discussion. But suffice it to say, because I want to touch on it, is that modern money is hierarchical. It has maratib, we would call them. Every martaba is with respect to the one below it is a debt relationship, and with respect with respect to the one above it is a debt relationship, and with respect to the one below it is a monetary instrument, and it culminates in the dollar system, in the US dollar system, so it has an international dominance dimension. The second thing to understand is not only does modern money enable the dominance of debt finance, but this is an ongoing process. This is not something that happened in the 19th century and we're done with it. These graphs show you the expansion of debt, both public and private, as a percentage of GDP in the post-World War II era. If you look at what's called advanced economies, debt as a percentage of GDP has tripled, and emerging markets probably multiplied by 20 times in the post-war era. So this is an ongoing process of institutional development, not a finished process. Now, to come back to the genesis of modern money, I think many of you would know the role of the creation of the initially private Bank of England had to do with this invention in 1694. And 3 minutes? Okay. I'll take a little bit longer and go very quickly. So I'm going to skim through the material. So essentially, the Bank of England was created to solve the problem of expanding the debt capacity of the British government in its war with France. And essentially, it was created in a way that the Bank of England would issue an instrument, which is an IOU, like a current account today. It's a note. Lend it to the government, and the government would use it to pay people, its service providers in the war, and then would accept it in the payment of taxes. And that was the invention, and that's what developed. Now, this graph shows you the expansion of public debt in the UK, which started to be funded in particular in this way, in conjunction with wars. So each bar here is one of the wars of the 18th century, and you can see that this was essentially a problem of military power initially, and only later became one of consumption and economic development. And as a problem of military power, it was irresistible for the Islamic world not to adopt it. Again, there are statistics here, but essentially
diyor. Ve şöyle görüyoruz, aslında fiskal geliri görülüyor. Ve
against future revenues would essentially have 80 times the ability to wage war compared to the Chinese or Ottomans at the time. And the only way to counter that at the time was a tanzimat form of adopting, in particular for the Ottomans, creating, for example, the Imperial Ottoman Bank, borrowing in the public markets, and yes, going bankrupt as a result of refinancing the debt. So it is a power system at the end, and that's how it expanded. Only later did commercial adoption in parallel, but later follow in terms of financing production and then financing consumption. What is very important to keep in mind is that as the banking system competes for borrowers, the profits from the franchise of issuing money for free moves by competition to the borrowers, and therefore leads to a system where debt is subsidized. And this is what economists know as the equity risk premium puzzle. Effectively, debt versus equity is a big distortion where borrowing costs about 5% less than risk-sharing investment. And that is a structural advantage of debt finance due to the money that we have. And this is why you will look at capital markets, in particular banking markets, and the amount of debt in the system is multiple times that of equity due to this distortion. So, and then finally, modern money, as soon as you remove it from its gold standard, becomes subject to expropriation, inflationary expropriation. Now, I am going to take a few more minutes, Dr. Sami, otherwise the discussion will not be led. What is the Islamic perspective on this? 2 slides, so I'm not abusing the time. The first one is that the expansion, I would call it irresponsible expansion of debt in society, mirrors the abandonment of transcendent responsibility. So dain mirrors deen, and it is not a coincidence that the two are semantically related. Deen is an obligation to the creator, to transcendent principle. So deen is an obligation to the dayan, as we say. Dain is an obligation in the Medina to society. And this obligation relates the creditor and the debtor. The creditor obligee, as the lawyers say, and the debtor as obligor. And both of them, as you expand debt capacity, experience moral failure. The famous saying in the tradition is, ad-daynu shaynu din. Debt is the blemish of religion, because of the moral responsibility beyond capacity that is carried. Now, we're very much aware of the riba dimension on the creditor side. You know, normally the creditor either acts with justice, let me have my principal, or with forbearance in case the obligor is unable to pay. But now we've invented an opposite reaction of exploitation or riba, meaning asking more than what you're owed. And that is an abhorrent dimension, moral dimension. But equally, in terms of the debtor, the Islamic principles really are extremely rigorous in terms of laxity of entering debt obligations. You know, توسع بالدين من دون ضرورة is considered a morally lax and dangerous practice. So on both sides, you have a moral problem. So I would like to simply end with an Islamic analysis of this system, this cage in which we are. I just touched on the first two, moral erosion from excessive debt or lax indebtedness, and then exploitation of financial distress in terms of riba. This is where most of Islamic finance works. It's the exploitation of financial distress, less so in terms of توسع بالدين, in terms of the debtors. But even there, I think we have a problem in Islamic finance in terms of qalb al-dain, refinancing, because that is not a documented, that is a facts and circumstances situation. But this is where Islamic finance has tried to remove some of the corruptive effects of a debt-based system. But the system doesn't stop at these very important moral dimensions. We know that when you have a lot of indebtedness, you have financial fragility at the individual and at the macro level. This is the source of economic instability. We know that you have inflationary expropriation. I don't need to mention the Islamic countries today that are running hyperinflations. From Pakistan to Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey, and so on, you name them. Not to the fifth corruptive effect is entrenched wealth inequality, because if debt is subsidized and a debt goes to people who have collateral and future income, it's not going. The subsidy is not going to the needy; it's going to those who already have. So this is a system that entrenches inequality. And finally, I mentioned to you the system that dominated ultimately internationally by the US dollar. It's a system of international dominance as well. Now, of course, I would say Islamic finance has worked within this to alleviate some of its inner moral failures, but I think the system itself is very difficult to break out of, and I think it is an obligation, a fard kifaya, on the Islamic community to start thinking of strategies. These are not techniques. Strategies to try to break out of this system. And there are very, very good and promising avenues which 20 minutes doesn't allow me time to touch on. But I don't want to leave you with any thoughts of desperation, but hope. Thank you so much, Dr. Sam.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. Thank you so much, Dr. Hammour, for your very insightful presentation. I do have an array of questions. Before I manage to pose one, I do want to give the floor to the audience. And I apologize again for being over time. We're cutting into the break, but nonetheless, I think we can wrap up in a matter of a few minutes if we're diligent. So please, the floor is open to comments, questions for Dr. Hammour. Yes, the question in the third row from the bottom.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your talk. So I have like a two-part question. So how did, I'm wondering, how did the colonial era in some Islamic countries speed up the adoption of the global economic system? How did it affect their economic systems that we can even eventually see right now, influencing their major economic policies? And how can we deal with these economic policies now? Okay, we're in this situation now with the global capitalist economies. How these countries can try to a little switch from, for instance, export orientation policies to more of trying to switch to an inner markets policies, maybe. How these countries should actually direct their policies into. Thank you.
Yeah, your reference to the colonial era, I think, is very relevant because, you know, colonialism, and it is not a coincidence that the inventor of the Bank of England became the biggest empire within a century around the world. It is not even a coincidence that the prior economy, which is the Dutch economy, that was essentially copied and enhanced on by the English, actually was invited to invade England in order to get the Dutch model working in England, was in a country with 1.5 million people colonizing with colonies and violently acquired, you know, merchant domination from Indonesia to Brazil to Manhattan to African colonies and so on. I mean, these methods of finance are extremely powerful. They're as powerful as our more usual thinking of explosives and guns and so on. And it's the combination of those two that have allowed the colonial expansion. So on the receiving end, you had two choices. You either did not adopt the new system, and you got colonized, and it was imposed on you in a way that was very distorted and self-serving, or you did a Tanzimat type reform to mimic the new system. And it's interesting, I mean, the Imperial Ottoman Bank was a French-British bank acting as a central bank for the Ottoman Empire and issuing its currency, because the technique of that, and then the Ottoman state was borrowing in the European bond market. So you can see that to wage war, and that was the main reason. I mean, you could also think of infrastructure, which was very important logistically, even to wage war, railroads and the like, but it was essentially a power play. We think of finance as, you know, moving consumption from tomorrow to today. That was not, this is a very, very late application in the credit card of finance. This was a military complement of military power until today. So it's very important. How to get out of it is a long story. I don't think with the time pressure we can touch on that.
Hello, Mr. Hammour. I have a question for you. You know, there is a theory, of course you know, but maybe our listeners don't know. After First World War, the Muslim countries got petrol and get a lot of money, a lot of profit. So the England want to take this money to the system, and so they founded the Islamic financial system. Is it right? The Islamic financial system founded by Britain, or really the Muslims need this system and they found this? Thank you.
Well, I would say that today, if you are a business person and don't want to take debt, I mentioned debt is subsidized in this monetary system, and you don't have a choice of, you know, let's use our own gold as a currency today. It's not, given where things are. If you are a Muslim business entrepreneur and want to avoid debt, often you cannot do more than a falafel shop, because you will not be competitive. Your competitor is expanding, has the scale of debt and has the cheapness of debt. And unless you happen to be lucky and just have money that doesn't require return, you're not going to expand. And this is even more important between states and in terms of military power. If you cannot respond to an emergency with borrowing today, and borrowing is subsidized again, you lose. You lose in the emergency. So I think the system that is debt-based essentially creates losers and winners depending on whether they adopt it or not. So I don't know that it's only imposed. Of course, the system is distorted and dominant and therefore imposed, but people are, so to speak, voluntarily adopting the system because otherwise they're even weaker than this. So it is a major conundrum. I think turning the system into Islamic is making it more palatable in a good way, because it addresses some of the abhorrent practices of riba inside the system, but in no way really makes it Islamic in all its dimensions. We saw all the corruptive effects that we cannot avoid. So it is a system waiting for reform from an Islamic point of view, even though some of the corruptive practices have been corrected. So it is a real conundrum. We are in a cage, and we have to think really hard what to do about that.
Thank you so much, Professor Hammour. Given that we're deep into the coffee break, please another round of applause for Dr. Yılmaz and Dr. Hammour. And we all. Thank you so much to both. We do have gifts for our speakers.